First of all, thank you for joining this webinar today about redefining ready. Just a few logistical things before we get started. This is going to be about a half hour or so, and it's going to be more of a conversation about this initiative across schools around the country. One thing to note is there is a Q&A section of the Zoom. If you have any questions, if something, a topic kind of sparks something that you'd like to learn more of, we're going to block off some time at the end to take some questions that come in, or just any thoughts that you might have as well. So if you have any comments, thoughts, anything that you'd like to share, feel free to utilize that, and we'll kind of pluck some of those towards the end. My name is Paul Kaskovich. I'm representing the company Otis, which some of you maybe are familiar with. But my background's in education. I'm a former teacher and school administrator. This session's not really about me, so I'm going to move over and then now talk about my colleague, Scott Carr. Scott is also a former educator and school administrator. He's now working as a consultant for CISA 2 in Wisconsin, and his focus is on redefining ready and supporting schools to do a lot of the work behind this and a lot of the movements and changing student outcomes that are a result of that. And so that's where we're going to kind of focus today on that work and that topic. And Scott and I, yeah, we met. How long has it been, Scott, since we've connected? About 2 years ago, I think.
Well, I think we maybe talked the beginning of last school year a little bit. I don't know. How did you come across even reaching out to me? I don't even remember.
Yeah, well, so at Otis, we were organizing student data. We're helping school
Yeah,
districts utilize it and do that in a number of different ways. I just kept hearing the topic, redefining ready, or
yeah,
sometimes it's under the lens of portrait of a graduate. And
yeah,
out of curiosity, I was trying to learn more and more, and our names crossed
yeah,
paths, and me kind of reaching out to try to understand a little bit more about it.
yeah. Now I do remember we've come a long ways. I do remember our conversation when we first met. Your curiosity around this work and interest. I think it went a little bit further than just, hey, I'm a guy that represents a platform that can help you. And I think, one of the things that I really appreciated when we first met was my frustration in this was that I was noticing that people were really driving towards the metric end of it, right? The redefining ready piece of it tends to show its face in the metrics, scorecards, and all of these types of things. And I know it's a lot deeper than that, right? I mean, our conversation, you and I talked about, all the work-based learning, career-based learning opportunities. And I was frustrated because I couldn't find anybody that'd be like, okay, what does that look like? And then you and I had that conversation, and right away, you guys became innovative. It was like, all right, tell me more. I think I even shared a few things with you, didn't I?
Yeah.
Then I share a few of the kind of the metrics that we were looking at. And I think we came back together maybe a month later, and all of a sudden, bam, you show it. You actually had it in your platform. You
Yeah.
remember that?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Just hearing about all the different things that schools are doing from, setting up students with opportunities to explore different career paths, to get workplace experience, and
Right.
not just career paths, but also setting up students for a college path too. It just all the different things that are being done in K-12
Yeah.
schools to adjust for growing trends in education or shifts with their students to meet them at their needs. There's just so many ways that schools are doing that, and it's just important to track and show those. And I was just eager to learn more. Uh,
Yeah.
so tell me a little bit. Let's just kind of set the stage here.
Sure.
For those that maybe aren't as familiar with redefining ready, what is redefining ready, and where are schools at with this initiative?
Yeah, that's interesting. It's I think redefining ready. I was at CISA 7, last year, and CISA 7 really kind of brought this to our state back, I think, in 2017, and they did really a great job with it. And I don't want to say redefining ready is getting a little stagnant, but what I've learned and what I've seen, most recently is that it goes beyond that, right? Obviously, an entry point when I start working with districts, we start to talk about the experiences, I like to call them, right? the experiences are those things that we offer to our students that they can get engaged in, and we start to see, more of the outcomes and the growth of those outcomes in those experiences. And so Redefining Ready obviously incorporated the college career metrics in it, life ready type metrics. But again, it's going past that, right? It's more than the metrics. It's more of, a focus on that career exploration and trying to drill that down, drive it down, create that foundation in every classroom.
Right.
And some of the things that we talk about when I get in and start to do this work is, obviously we want to know where we're at, that starting point. Where's our baseline with some of these metrics? And as you know, right, I mean, as you develop this in Otis, as you put in those metrics, you recognize it, right? I mean, you can speak to this, right? You recognize these metrics are kids either did it or they didn't do it, right? And
Right.
if you're going to do like a job shadow, it's something that they go do, right? So that's kind of, to what level is the district invested in that? And then typically where I see a data warehouse platform needed is as once we get into this work, down the road a little bit more. But typically what we're seeing is that it becomes very fractured when I enter and I see it's very fractured. It's siloed. All this
Right.
stuff is taking place in our schools, but they're not marrying it all together. And so it goes well past redefining ready. That's just one of what I call the gears. It's just one of the areas that we look at and we kind of assess current state, see where they're at. But yeah, it's been quite the evolution, man. Not only the evolution, it has really, really exploded.
Yeah.
Everybody's reaching out saying, what is this? What's going on? And I mean, right, you and I have even talked about this. You know why it's happening, right?
Right.
Well, why is it happening? What's happening in our classrooms that is pushing us towards this?
Well, there's so many school districts and students that are realizing that the traditional path
Yeah,
that was presented to me and to you and a lot of generations of, beyond K-12 was this 4-year university path, and that was the
right.
only route to success. So people are realizing that that isn't always true for every student, and there's different needs, and we need to
Yeah,
adapt and support students with their various needs.
yeah, yeah. You say that well. It's you know, it, our educational system is changing and it needs to change. Bottom line, right? I mean, we need to keep up with society. We need to keep up with technology and what's taking place. So get this, this is kind of what drives the interest right away. Two main what we call problems really, and we have to be respectful enough that hey, we're not doing it as well as we can, and as we recognize these problems, we have to do something about it. The number one problem that we see is that we have less than 40% of our students in classrooms engaged, right? So that puts it at about 60% of our students in our classrooms that are disengaged. And out of the 60%, we're seeing upwards of 25 to 30% of our students that are actively disengaged, right? So what they're choosing to do in a classroom is not even close to what an educator is asking them to do, right? And so what does that look like in our classrooms? Is it turns into what our teachers see as a compliance issue, behavioral issues, and what our system has really kind of moved towards over time is to resolve those behavioral issues.
Right.
Now, it's a piece of the whole picture. Don't get me wrong. We have to have expectations and we have to set a standard, in our classrooms. But that focus needs to be around what we look at as, relevance.
Yeah.
The second issue that we're seeing is we're seeing our educators exit, our field,
Yeah.
and we're not seeing teachers, entering into our field to replace. And it's because of these struggles. It's because it's in a sense not as enjoyable as it once used to be.
Yeah.
And so we need to bring that back, and I think this work here really revitalizes those educators. We're seeing it in the work that we've been doing in some of the schools that I've been invested in. We're really seeing it.
All right. So let me ask you this. I want to kind of break down one of those challenges that you you mentioned with disengagement. If a
Sure.
school approaches you and says, "Hey, we've surveyed our students, or we just have a general sense that we have this huge group of students in our school district that are disengaged," um, and that's a key area and a focus that we want to change. Obviously, some of the metrics and things like that would be developed later on as ways to kind of show growth. But
Yeah.
what are some of those initial steps that you do with the school district in terms of getting started and just kind of level setting expectations and really starting to break down those layers?
Yeah, yeah, it's a great question. Well, what we're recognizing, right? And this is something that I like to do when I come in. One is to ask a lot of questions. That's one
Right.
of the first things I do. And one of the things I try to get a read on is, what do they believe, those that I'm working with, what do they believe the fundamental purpose of an educational system is? Because that's where we've steered the nose of our ship in the wrong direction at times. We have a strong focus on achievement, and we need to, don't get me wrong, but I think it's a part of put the cart in front of the horse in a sense, right? And we're driven towards that with a lot of federal and state mandates around achievement and standardized testing and all of that. But what we look at up front is asking that question. And the next question I ask, because we start to think, well, what is it? And ideally, it's preparing kids, right? It's a preparedness type process, and preparing kids, to be career ready. I mean, bottom line is, if they walk out and they're career ready, that means that they can also continue their education if needed.
Right.
They can make good decisions in their lives because they're stable, and they're able to, pursue their personal values and really kind of where they want to lead themselves. We're seeing that students, and there's been a lot of research in the last year or so around our Gen Zs. And what we're seeing is that only about 50% of our students even feel challenged in our school systems, but yet they're super hopeful. Our Gen Zs are telling us that they all want to be billionaires, but they only want to work 4 hours a day, right? So bless their souls. I wish that could happen, right? But they want students want agency, they want power, they want to be
Yeah.
able to own their own learning, right? So when you start to bring this concept in, it doesn't take long for the light bulb to go off with people and go, oh, yeah, that makes sense. So we
Right.
do a lot of reflectiveness around, well, where are you at now in your system? And you get a little pushback, once you start to dive towards a non-traditional direction, if you would. But when you ask the question, if we were to ask a kid in 10th grade or second grade, if you pulled them out of a classroom and said, hey, what's your purpose?
Right.
Could a kid actually even answer that?
Right.
Right. So when you ask that, when you bring that to the attention of like you, because I always start with the decision makers, right? It's always traditionally where we start with in schools, but yeah, it starts to make people think, right? And then so maybe you can pull up that. I think I sent something to you.
Yeah.
Thank you. You know,
We well, I
every
did.
guy every guy that's got, an organization, a business like you do, Paul, has to have a slide deck show to go.
Is this the right one?
No, back up, I guess. Go to the very first one, just where it's yeah,
Yep.
right there. So basically, and this is kind of evolved, and as you can see on the left-hand side there, where there's a state of Wisconsin, that's really the redefining ready piece to it. And that's either that or a portrait of a graduate is where people want to, start and ask the question, hey, we want to develop our portrait of a graduate. And I'm like, okay. And I usually don't just step in and say, no, don't do that. What I end up saying is, all right, let's take a strong look at, where we're headed. And let's take even a more important look at what are our kids telling us? What's happening, and or what's happening in your system, and what are they telling us? So bottom line is, we enter into all five of these areas, and one of the real key areas that we end up driving towards all the time is what I call portrait of a system. And it's that implementation process. And, lo and behold, every school I get involved in, the culture's not supporting the opportunity for us to get this down into the, ground level of a classroom. And it's because we are, moving towards that traditional, approach a lot of the times in school systems, that educational, traditional, concept. So what we typically start to look at, we're about the 4-month mark, 5-month mark with schools. We start to look at, okay, now you know what it is. How are we going to do the do in the classrooms?
Right.
And that really then starts to bend their thinking, as you can imagine.
Right.
I generally use a lot of Anthony Muhammad's work. Time for Change is a great book. Him and Luis Cruz. I generally enter in with something like that. So each school's different. I'll tell you, Paul. Each school tends to have, a different need. But boy, when we get into it, we tend to all of a sudden always come back to, let's slow down, let's build our culture,
Yep.
let's let our educators in the classroom own the discovery around what this needs to be. And that's usually
Absolutely.
where we start to really gain some traction.
All right. So just to kind of tie it in with tax season here, my kind of analogy is like it seems like you start a little bit with an audit and really just kind of
Yeah,
understanding
yeah,
where schools are, of kind of what systems are in place, and get just a general sense of the culture. But then it really digs in deep at a classroom level
yeah,
to really do the important things in terms of changing how we're approaching teaching and educating students so that they are ready for life's challenges, whatever it might be for each individual kid.
yeah.
So what one piece that I want to kind of get to then, and perhaps this is where you were going already, is that how do you then connect the school to the community and all the stakeholders outside of the K-12 structure? What does that look like, and how is that part of your work?
Yeah, generally a lot of the schools are already having that type of a connection, right? Um, they school districts tend to bring that connection in when they start to do strategic planning. I was just in a school district just most recently. We're kind of talking about that, but in that traditional sense, we see it a lot of the times at our highest level, whether it's the superintendent or it's a administration team, and they reach out and connect. But often we leave, all of our educators, those in the classroom, we leave out of that picture sometimes. And interestingly, in our state and really in the United States, work-based learning, career-based learning opportunities in our school systems has really taken off. So there's been a natural connection, to our CTE courses and classes and stuff like
Yeah.
that. And there's so much work going on out there, whether it's through workforce development, whether it's, just in our state, but that natural connection's already starting to happen. The issue we start to see, one of the issues is that we're not seeing it connect to every single classroom. So that's part of the blueprint as we start to unleash this work, is to be able to bring it to the attention of the educators. I like to move in a direction where we allow the educators to create the do. How it happens, they need to create. And then I help them, or the people that are part of the leadership process with this. We tend to then try to help resourcefully, bring those resources to them, which is then connecting them to our communities. The community wants this. I
Yeah.
mean, in every school system I've been involved in, and all the connections that I have out there in our communities, they want it. But I'll tell you, Paul, one of the real key pieces here is don't go too fast.
Yeah.
You got to be able to let the educators, and we generally go from a leadership, strategic type team, then we move to what we call a readiness team. That's really your implementation process. And the readiness team is only made up of educators, nobody else. And we have to slow move that scalability, if you would, with them, and let them discover that they need this, right? And when I tell you, I was in 2 districts yesterday, and one of the districts I was working with, I was literally working with the educators in the that are in the classroom, right? And you can't push too hard. You have to have them let that have that aha moment. And sure enough, you can feel it. I mean, you could totally feel the transformation is happening. I kind of wanted to say to the leader, the administrator I was working with, kind of, all right, time for hands off here. And once you know it, his name's Mike. He reached out and said, hey, he got some information from one of the teachers that made this comment. I thought it was really good. They had this aha moment that they said teaching should be less about what we think students should learn and more about what students want to learn and do to prepare for their future. And so, it's like, okay, but can you see, Paul, how
Yeah.
that movement needs to be slow?
Yeah. Oh,
Because all of a sudden it's discovery. And it's kind of like your guys' work. I'm constantly with saying, hey, Otis is a great platform because what they do is they want, administrators want that platform, they want the data warehouse, they want
yep.
the metrics. So right away I got to brag Paul up in Otis to the group and say, okay, here's a really good one. It really interacts with students. It's probably one of the best that's out there. And then eventually I got to slow that down a little bit and then start to work with the teachers because they're not going to ask about having another resource right away up front. We got to get to a point where they're asking for a platform like yours, right?
Right. Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, just saying that like what that line that you just shared, I just flashed back to teaching seventh grade social studies and like, yeah, maybe the kids didn't really want to learn about my lesson on the Revolutionary War. Maybe I should have tweaked that. And yeah, that's a huge shift and it's a huge
Right.
change. Um,
Yeah,
but
there's
still
some
covering
really
kind of the key content and
yeah.
balancing that.
There's some really good stuff happening. And it's just a matter of connecting our teachers to this great stuff. So I share a ton of webinars, a ton of panel discussions and things like that. We have to stay away from, and I get this all the time when I first start the entry point with the readiness team and teachers is that this can be one more thing on our plate, right?
Sure.
And it's not. This work contextualizes everything that we do in our school systems. And when they can transform and move towards that vision, and it's happening. And we got a couple of schools. I'm in about six to eight schools right now. We've got a few of them that are just really doing some great work, and we're seeing it. We're really kind of seeing it. And this is kind of funny. I always bring this one up when I start the work. People will say, what is it? How do you know it's happening? Where's the evidence? And I kind of joke and I said, well, it's kind of like an octopus, right? Everyone knows it when you see it, but it's hard to describe. It's hard to
Right.
describe. And I
Right.
was in a school, Delve and Daring, I was in their school about 3 or 4 weeks ago. And I walked the hallways with Mike, and it's like, you can feel it. You can just feel the difference in relationship, to this really career exploration, readiness, students finding their purpose, which allows them to create readjust their priorities, create plans. It's really good stuff.
So I know you mentioned a lot of the challenges
Yeah.
that schools have. Any other challenges kind of top of mind that you want to point out that you didn't already mention?
Well, yeah, obviously, Paul, it's where you and I connected, right? And as I joke about it, they're always wanting the data, some direction towards scorecard or data up front, right? That's usually superintendents, directors. So the big challenge ends up being, once we get to where kids are self-guided and owning this work, we need to have something that they can engage in, right? So they can invest their time in and go, okay, here's where I can do some of this work. So
Yeah.
obviously that's our relationship between you and I. So yeah, we're seeing the need for the data warehouse end of it, but that to be interactive with our students. And I know that's something that you guys offer, and uh,
Yeah.
yeah, you should share some of that.
Yeah. So just
I'm
to
sure you got it right at your fingertips. You always do.
just to kind of show a little bit about kind of how Scott and I connected is that, a lot of schools will have metrics that they're tracking from a number of different types of things that are lumped together in a scorecard or things that they'll share with their community and stakeholders. And a lot of these maybe are traditional in terms of ACT scores or it's attendance data that is maybe stored in a bunch of different places from your student information system or in these various silos. That's one thing that Otis can do is we can bring it together And then we have the ability to kind of run reports where you can see and compare different cohorts of grade levels, of buildings, of different segments of your student population on all of these different metrics. But the key piece and the key challenge that I kept running into with school districts, even before that I met Scott and we kind of had this conversation, was around some of those other things that were maybe
Yeah.
more anecdotal in nature. They're maybe more qualitative, or they were things that were difficult to track, but were very important pieces of this work. So not just kind of the college ready indicators, but things like, are students getting workplace learning experience? Are they participating in co-curricular activities, capstone courses, entrepreneurship opportunities, or even things like visiting a college campus or exploring different careers? A lot of this stuff was being tracked, and I was hearing just all the technical challenges of putting together those scorecards. And that's something that, as Scott shared with me, I was like, well, let me try to kind of build what this could look like down to an individual student. And so when an individual student is working towards this, the ability to update specific things or to have data that flows in from all of these particular sources like your GPA and your ACT and your attendance rate, so that you can see a historical trend of how that student's performed on those metrics, or to have things like those anecdotal or more qualitative information, to have people like your CTE coordinators or your counselors, your staff members go in and be able to update these various things with notes and attachments. But also, and this is one thing that since we connected and kind of approached this, is we've given the ability for students to go in here and view their plan and update their statuses directly. So with that student agency piece, that's been a big part of it as well, so that students can be involved in kind of updating and owning their different paths. And then ultimately, all of this kind of flows in a way where you can track some of those different metrics on a larger scale, whether it's a classroom teacher or a building level leader or district level leaders, to be able to report out all of the great things that you're doing and all of the change that happens through taking this on with someone like Scott and doing really the hard work. This is just a way that you can kind of store this information, track it, and it travels with the student from year to year. So that's a little bit of kind of how Otis works and kind of where our conversation came about, and it kind of has evolved over the last couple of years.
Yeah, Paul, like I said before, what I really appreciated with you and Otis was up front when I was able to say, hey, and it was you were the one that was intrigued by it and curious, was like, asking what can you guys do? Because I was frustrated. You can imagine my work really is around the career community life readiness piece. It is not so much around the achievement end of it, right? Achievement's going to come. Don't get me wrong. It's not like we push it off to the side. But what I really appreciated with you was that you heard that and you're like, okay, where can we add this? So what do you have any like what are your thoughts with Otis down the road and some of the things that you're looking at, maybe making it more engaging and interactive?
Yeah, so it's funny, like I'm a former educator. There's so many people on our team, all the way up to our founder and president, that is a former educator, and a big part of how our platform's evolved. I've been at Otis over 6 years now, is really through feedback from users,
Yeah.
and feedback from people that are exploring our tools and functions. So we've grown a lot, and we have continued to put things on our roadmap that will evolve with schools' needs. And it's a unique platform in that sense, in that it is dynamic and listening, and we're constantly evolving. But there's so many different ways that we support schools with visualizing growth down to a classroom level and delivering common assessments and progress monitoring, that there's so many different things that have changed over the course of time. And it's just really cool to see all of the different ways that we're helping schools with various needs like that.
Yeah. Yeah, you got to be innovative, right? I mean, it's part of who we are. Maybe there's people out there probably knew this, but I didn't until I heard it. But even with YouTube, right? I was fortunate to hear this guy. His name's John Rethens, who's who's part of the educational process at YouTube, and I found it very, very interesting, right? Well, how innovative they are, right? They recognize that about 93 to 95% of the users are on YouTube to learn something. So they're moving that towards being able to earn college credit through YouTube. Like, wow, I'm going to go to YouTube U, man. That'd be kind of fun. But yeah, really, I mean, you have to be innovative. So to hear that you guys are really working towards that connectability, I think that's key. Because, in this work, this is really interesting. I wanted to say this before, but in the work, there's actually kind of two pieces to it. One is the system itself, right? And that's where we tend to really get caught up in that process. The other side of it is the learner process and changing what that landscape looks like for our students, because we've always had the achievement expectations for kids in classrooms. And that's where we've seen this high level of foreclosure from our kids. We're realizing kids are foreclosing on the educational system as early as 7 years old, right? So the one piece of the work that I'm doing at CISA 2, which we really believe in, is where does the kid part of it come into this? Where the expectation, part of this happen for our kids, our students, and that's part of the learner process.
Yep.
And so there's two pieces really to this that opens up. It's the environment, but we can't leave out the fact that our kids, once we get the change in that environment, our kids need to own this process. We call it the learner process, and which speaks to your platform, because part of that is the expectation that kids are part of their learning journey, right? That they're self-guided. They need a tool like what you guys offer to be a part of it.
Absolutely.
So,
All right. Well, just looking at the time, we're about at the end of the time here. If there's any other questions that or comments that people have, feel free to drop that in the Q&A. I think we got one just a couple minutes ago that I think kind of summarizes and puts a bow on this, as it really talks about the impact of students when it comes to this work, which is the most important thing. Otis is
right.
in place to impact student learning and really change the dynamic of schools. That's what your work is dedicated on. And so hearing this from Mike, who you referenced earlier,
Mike's
he
he's
actually is
on.
participating here. He said, the hard truth is that many of our students aren't seeing the purpose of their education, which leads to the challenges we face in education every day: teacher and student burnout, classroom management, graduation rates, engagement, etc. Schools need to take the time to bridge the gap between the classroom and the student's skills, attributes, their passions and interests, and
Yeah,
career pathways to ensure engagement, readiness, quality of life, and long-term satisfaction. Our
yeah.
district started working with Scott last school year, and the work has truly transformed our culture for students and staff. This is the future of education. The work fosters students
There you go.
that are not only ready for the next level, but achieving at a level that is relevant to their future. This work helps students and staff find their purpose. I thought that was a great summary.
Yeah,
I appreciate you sharing that, Mike.
yeah.
And I want to thank everyone for your time today and participating, or if you did watch this as a recording. One thing to note is that we are giving away a free consultation with Scott to a lucky attendee.
There you go.
Be on the lookout for information about that in the coming days. There will be a follow-up to this as well with some information.
You know, hey Paul, I'm hoping the person that wins that is like from somewhere warm, maybe Hawaii or at least Florida or something like that.
um, yeah, I don't know. We'll see kind of where we go. I might,
You
just
might be
pull
able to
in
pull
northern
that name
Canada for
out,
you too,
pull that name out of the hat.
um, but contact information if you have any questions for Scott, or if you're interested in learning a little bit more from me, particularly on the Otis end. Information's up here. There's Scott's email. There's my email. Please don't hesitate to reach out. Be on the lookout for follow-up information from us after this. And thank you, everyone, for attending this session. I hope you found it beneficial, and we look forward to continuing to support schools like that are interested in redefining and all the redefining ready and all the other initiatives related to that down the road.